Today's episode is sponsored by Future State Media, experts in off-Amazon traffic for Amazon sellers. Future State Media will build you a custom-made website to deliver sales for you on Amazon. Built to grab traffic from search engines and social media, your site can be used as a secret weapon for launching products on Amazon or just to stabilize your Amazon sales. It means you can also build an email list on autopilot. Go to futurestatemedia.com for your free guide to Google SEO for Amazon sellers today.
All right, in today's episode, we are going to continue our conversation on the 6 process power principles. Michael, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're ready to break it down for us today. In the prior conversation, we talked about principle 1, 2, and 3. So why don't we dig into this? Before we dig into principle 4, 5, and 6, let me just read the list again so that we can kind of do a refresher in case somebody hasn't listened to the first episode. So here they are. Here are the 6 process power principles. Number 1, review and examine everything in your business that's repeated. Number 2, start with the end in mind. Number 3, stand on the shoulders of giants. Number 4, focus on the critical few. Number 5, move levels with awareness and fluency. And number 6, monitor, communicate, and correct. So Michael, why don't you break down principle number 4 for us? What does it mean to focus on the critical few?
Well, first of all, yeah, I love this topic. Glad to be talking about it again. So the critical few really is referenced by Tim Ferriss in the 4-Hour Work Week, which has become a bit of a sort of cliche reference for a lot of online entrepreneurs, but I still think it's a very, very well written book and it's stood the test of time very well. We've talked about this before, so I'm going to talk about it very quickly. The READ, we talked about revise, eliminate, automate, delegate in the Team 10 episode we talked about. And revise is basically the same as principle number 1, which is make sure you revise, re-examine everything, and then eliminate, automate, and delegate, which is very valid, but we've talked about it before. But when we're talking about the revision piece, I want to talk about another sort of sub-principle, which is 3x 80-20, or the 80-20 of the 80-20 of the 80-20, which sounds like gobbledygook. What does that mean? Well, 80% of results come from 20% of input. Most people know this and then do nothing about it, but that means that you really need to examine what you're doing every day. But it goes much deeper than that, because that means 80% of that set of results comes from 20% of that input. In other words, 64% of your results come from 4% of your actions, or indeed activities, people, products, and 50% of your results come from less than 1% of the stuff you do, which means that if you're feeling particularly lazy / effective, all you need to do is really identify those really critical few things and make sure that at the very least you're doing those well, and your business will do okay. And if you do 4% of the stuff well, it's going to do very well. So what is lovely about this is that if you break things down, whilst you have to do more mental work initially when you're reviewing stuff, when it comes to the day-to-day work, you can do a fraction of the work you were doing before, literally, and get most of the results, which I think is a beautiful thing. So what are your thoughts on this? Obviously, very famous principle, the Pareto Principle, but have you actually found it useful in real life?
Oh, sure. I love the idea and concept, and try to apply it frequently. In the prior episode, I mentioned that I feel like we're finance-focused e-commerce operators, and this is where we play this out frequently. So, just one example not from our business, but from one of my coaching clients. When we began working with her, it's probably 4 months ago or so, the first thing we did was look at a profit and loss statement for the prior year. And there just wasn't a lot. There was a lot of sales, but not a lot of profit. And we asked her what her goals were, and she said that was the number one goal. She really needed her system to be profitable. And so we, put together a set of goals. And this week, actually, in the conversation, we reviewed the most recent profit and loss statement, and look back at the prior 5 months. And one thing stood out, and that was her top line revenue number had not grown in the direction that she had wanted, with the speed at which she had wanted, but her profit had grown incredibly well, and year over year is set to just be like a double or more. And so it's totally revolutionized her business. And so she was focused on the top line number when we started talking, and then when we kind of dug into it, we were like, well, this bottom line number, the profit number, that's the thing to focus on. And we came to the conclusion that at the end of the day, you have to focus on what matters in your business, and then apply 80-20 thinking to that. And I think that's the first thing to think through is how do we apply this 80-20 idea where we really narrow down the extraneous stuff and eliminate it, focus on the core ideas in your business that are really central to your success based on your definition of success. And I guess that's how I apply it is, you really want to apply it tactically in your business. And that's, Tim Ferriss's book. I remember he talks about having some clients who just killed him and how, all of his clients were great, but except for like these three guys who were just idiots. And those three people caused 80% of his stress and drama. And so, so I think this has to be applied very tactically to come to affect specific outcomes in your business that really can make a huge difference. So I guess that's kind of my musings on it, my ramblings on it. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I think the idea of focus on particular things and which you choose to focus on is very, very critical. Because, yeah, if you over-engineer some process that is unimportant, then it's not going to make much difference. But
Yeah.
yeah, nevertheless, you can probably apply the principle of digging down to the critical few across the board. But I agree that it's got to be specific.
Right.
Great.
So principle 5 is move levels with awareness and fluency. What do you mean by that? What goes into that stuff? Yeah.
So this is probably a reference to something that's not new to a lot of people, which is Michael Gerber's E-Myth Revisited framework of the entrepreneur, the manager, and the technician, or rather, I guess the other way around. Most people start off by being the technician, doing everything in their business. And if you've followed some course in order to do whatever, Facebook advertising to drive to your Shopify store, private label products on Amazon, whatever it is, chances are you're very much in the weeds. And an interesting concept that a guest of mine brought up recently, which is Dylan Carter, who runs various things, including Vendrive, his CRM tool for wholesale, but he's done a lot of Amazon wholesale stuff. And he says, look, you're going to need to move between levels. It's not a question of not working in your business. That actually can be a good thing as long as you're using the time to document the process. So I think you need to bot between levels. So if you're doing something, you've got to get it done first of all. There's a reason you're doing it, so you work as the technician. But then if you document it, you're effectively working as the manager. How can we make this process repeatable, more efficient? And then as the entrepreneur, sometimes you've got to zoom out. Maybe it's even once a week, once a month with your coach. Examine, should we even be doing this process? Is there a better way of achieving our long-term goals? So you're going to need to move between those levels. And I thought that was a really excellent observation of Dylan's, because it's one thing to think about those three different levels, and the implication is entrepreneurs better than technician and for grown-ups. And actually the truth is you've got to move between them in the messy, real, everyday process of creating a business. So that's really what I meant by that. What's your experience of that sort of reality in your everyday work with your clients?
Yeah, I think we all get to define our own role within our business. And I think it's critical for us to be able to document what we do personally and then ask the question, could I hand this off? And do that well, but maybe you don't hand it off. Maybe your zone of genius in a business is one specific thing. And you ultimately, I've used this phrase in our prior conversations, ultimately get to the place where you're focused on your highest and best work. And that you get to the place where everything else is handed off, and the level that you're operating at is the level that ideally only you could do, but you better, yeah, as we've talked about, you better have somebody else who can do it, your understudy, for when you want to sell or move on or be the owner and not the technician inside your business. And so, yeah, I think over time you end up moving through levels. And I've used this example before in a prior conversation where we had an employee leave and Cinnamon took over the role. And Cinnamon's first comment to me after a couple of days was, she was doing stuff we didn't even have done. We didn't need to have done. And I think it's a lesson of being aware of all the process in your business, being fluent with all the process steps, reviewing them quarterly or twice a year, maybe, I don't know, once a year. There's some stuff you can set up in a business and you never even think about it again. And that's a mistake. And so I think that's where my mind goes with this idea of you've got to be the shepherd of these processes, and they're yours. I mean, they're a business asset that you've got to care for and steward in a way, I guess. Yeah. So final principle is monitor, communicate, and correct. How do you do that?
Well, lots of things. First of all, I just want to reflect on be the shepherd is more or less leads very nicely into this. And you've already mentioned a couple of times about measuring what's actually going on, looking at the profit and loss statements, for example, for yourself or for your clients' businesses. And really, that comes down to the monitoring thing. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, person, go and do this process that I've created. But if you fire and forget, it's going to come back to bite you, to mix metaphors. Because I think there's what I call the Sorcerer's Apprentice syndrome, which is when you create something, you give it to a piece of software in the worst case scenario, or you give it to conscientious but non communicative VA, and you don't check in on the results. You can mass produce rubbish very swiftly, as they say, rubbish in, rubbish out, as they say in the computing system. So the solution is you really have to monitor what's going on, communicate clearly up front, but communicate during processes like, for example, I'm getting podcast episode editing back off my plate for Amazing FBA and 10K Collective because we produce, over 100 episodes a year. So I've created a process. I give it out to somebody, but I say, okay, send me a result, a first draft of that, if you like. And the same if you're getting a product physically made in China. It amazes me how many clients say, oh, do I need to really get a sample back? And I say to them, well, so you're honestly telling me you want to create 1,000 units of something, ship it all the way across the world to America and have it reviewed in the very first instance by a bunch of really fussy Amazon sellers and as soon buyers, and as soon as I say that, they go, okay, I get the point. So you've
Yeah.
got to have points of reference where you monitor in the correct course. So my question to you is a fun one. Where have you seen systems go horribly wrong by amplifying a mess, and then how have you or your clients corrected that?
It's a good question. But before I answer, let me just ask the question. Sorcerer's Apprentice
Sorcerer's Apprentice,
syn-
yeah, it's some.
syndrome. That's a fun phrase. Did you come up with that phrase?
I did. I
Where?
mean, the Sorcerer's Apprentice. I did not invent. That's an old, probably by Hanson Christian Andersen or somebody. It's an old fairy tale.
Yeah, yeah. Love it. Love it. Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's lots of horror stories we could draw upon as examples as it relates to communication and monitoring going wrong. I think as a manager, the hardest thing to do is to correct people's behavior. You know how it's a little bit like this process where you want to train somebody on something and then you quickly can see whether they got what you meant or not. And especially, when you work with a VA for the first time to set up a process, a good example of this occurs where you say something and then you really have to work diligently to say, do you understand what I'm asking? And you kind of have to manage people through this process of ownership of an action set or ownership of the process and watch the outcome. And as business owners, that's constant that is the job of the manager, is to constantly say, are my people doing things in the way that it was intended? And there's so much degradation of quality and loss of quality that can happen in that communication process where either people don't understand the big picture, they don't have the same level of sophistication or care. Oh, there's so many ways, so many ways
Yeah.
this can go badly, and we see it in our business all the time where we'll reflect on handing something to someone and then how it's gone, and it's a constant process of tune up. And to your point, I mean, you've got to hand it off, monitor how it goes, and then communicate back. And sometimes the communication can be um, it's stressful. I mean, it's hard to correct people's behavior and revisit what you previously said because clearly they didn't hear it, they didn't get it, or they're not understanding it. And that's always the hardest part of working with people. You got to do that with velvet glove. But if you abdicate responsibility, if you just say, well, I just don't want to talk about that issue, it seems awkward, then you've abdicated responsibility over parts of your business. You can't do that. I mean, when you do that, it just falls apart, and you learn those lessons quickly. So, yeah. So let me ask you, what do you mean by communication? How do you document, or how do you do the communication piece with your team members when you're going through this process of following up and clarifying how things should be done? What's that look like in your business? Is that video calls? Is it screen sharing? Is it emails? Is chats? What do you do?
Good question. I mean, I'm not saying I've got it down perfectly. I mean, my preference is for video calls. I think that Nathan Hirsch, who's very, very experienced, obviously having run Free Up and now Outsource School along with Connor Gillivan, his co-founder, says don't bother with video calls with people in the Philippines because they're obviously their internet isn't very good. Sometimes they're very shy about their spoken English. My preference is to do that if I can, but if not, to set aside a time to at least chat back and forth on Skype. A lot of people use Slack as well. I think whatever it is, you need to have a frequent communication rhythm, and whatever the form of meeting it is. I mean, I would just reference Vern Harnish's excellent scaling up rhythm, which when I've done it has worked really well. To a large degree, I've been very spotty with my implementation of this, and I think that's reflected in some more issues coming up than should have done or that we could have nipped in the bud earlier sometimes. So he starts
So
with the idea of the daily huddle of 15 minutes and then a weekly huddle of 60, 90 minutes. So you have a very regular rhythm of contact with people.
I'm not familiar with his system. So what's the Vern Harnish methodology? How does it work? Yeah.
Yeah, basically. So you have a sort of ever increasing size and complexity of meetings as it gets more frequent. So start with the daily huddle, 5 to 15 minutes. You basically
Okay.
ask three questions. You know, what are you working on? What problems have you got? What are you doing next? And then if a problem comes up, you don't deal with it then and there, which is quite elegant because you generally have most of your team. If you have a small team, maybe all of them, maybe up to 10 people.
Hmm.
Um, and then you take maybe that person aside and just deal with whatever's come up. So it's very good for catching problems and just monitoring your spinning various plates. Is there one wobbling? Are they all good?
Hmm.
The weekly huddle, you're going to review your quarterly priorities to make sure you're tying it in with monthly or quarterly priorities and focus on one or two main topics. So probably your focus for the quarter. Monthly meetings, similar ideas, but you're trying to get across a bit more maybe of the culture of what you've learned or some bigger issues. And then, of course, you got to have a quarterly or monthly planning meeting. And this is where I find that I suppose, self-serving to say it, but the what am I trying to say? The masterminds I run in London are very helpful because it gets people literally physically away from the office or their computer
Hmm.
at home and
Hmm.
reflecting on the things they need to do to move the needle over the next while and getting some impact from other people. And there's an obvious thing to have a weekly coaching call as well. So those are slightly different things, but either which way, that frequency I think is very important, and the rhythm of it is important as well.
Hmm.
I mean, how
Yeah.
do you find that stuff in your business? Do you have a sort of
Well,
regular meeting rhythm with your team?
we do. It's different for Pixie Fair business team versus our charity team versus the author speaker biz. My coaching stuff. So I guess I could describe each. For the charity, we have a Monday call. It's a Zoom meeting, but some people are local, so we've done. Part of the group is local in person, Monday morning at 10 a.m., and then part of the group is through Zoom. They dial in for it through a video call. And then what we've done as a group is we've done an annual planning meeting. So we don't do the quarterly, kind of focus. We just do an annual, and that's been really productive. It really helps um, stay on track. And the weekly stuff is I think a fairly effective time. We have a to-do list takeaway. Someone documents, um, and so then in every week there's an agenda that goes out early Monday morning, like 7 a.m. I'll send the agenda so people know what we're talking about. If there's anything for them to review, I'll attach it, that kind of thing. And then I also include the prior week's to-do list so that people see what we agreed we were going to do in the prior week. And a lot of, how it is. It's 5 minutes before the meeting. People are finishing some of those to-do list things or whatever, including me. I kind of operate that way
Yeah,
sometimes. And so
there's
that's
nothing like.
one. Well, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say only there is nothing like a deadline for getting stuff done,
Yeah.
especially if you're a fast start like you or me. I mean, having
Yep.
a deadline and some accountability in front of a load of other people, which is one of the many reasons why regular accountability meetings are important, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the thing I don't do that the Vern Harnish model recommends is we don't generally do a unique or different monthly or quarterly meeting. Now, Cinnamon and I do review of our monthly and quarterly profit and loss statement, and we do have communications that go out for Pixie Fair in particular on a monthly and quarterly basis for our business partners. For the designers in our system, and that's really a kind of communication tool we use, and it forces us to go through all the numbers to really have things at a high level that we can present. So yeah, I mean, I think in the various businesses I do it differently. In the VA business, I really do a daily check-in via Skype. and it's really about tactical implementation efforts and activities based on the standard operating procedures we have set up for each VA. And it's really just about touching base. How are you doing? What do you need? How can I help? Encouraging them. I always try to really leave them with a thank you so much for your hard work. Great job today. Great job this week. Hope you have a great weekend. Really try to, in that system, give them affirming, positive feedback. I don't know, maybe I should do that with all my teams more than I do. But for the VAs, for some reason, I always have tried to lean into that and really be a positive encourager every interaction I can.
I think that's really important. I'm by nature maybe very hypercritical of myself, and that means I can be very critical of others very quickly. And I try and remind myself that, especially with VAs, because various things. First of all, they're mostly in the Philippines, although I have had people in the States. But
Mhm.
so within that culture, as we mentioned before, that it is very important to emphasize the positive because they'll take criticism very seriously, which makes them
Mhm.
good employees in a lot of ways, but you have to manage that. The second thing is when people are working remotely, they can feel quite cut off. So you've got to generate extra emotional energy just to communicate that gap, which might be a bit over the top in an office. At least in British culture, we're not very effusive. And if you're a
Mhm.
bit more sort of American, say, awesome job, man, great, then it kind of works actually in that context. Whereas if you
Sure.
did that in Britain, you might kind of look at somebody and think like, are you trying to borrow money from me? What is it, But if you do that when it's in a more Americanized culture like the Philippines, plus the perfectionist Asian thing, I think
Mhm.
that makes it very, very important for me to remember not to be too British and stingy with my praise and be more generous. And also the other thing to say is, as Nathan says, Nathan Hirsch, who we've referenced before, very good at process of communications. It's best to err on the side of over communication rather than under with a virtual team because they can feel very cut off and not part of a team at all. So
Yeah.
those are my sort of thoughts, my feelings on that.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap this up. So, do you want to do a recap of the six principles again? Walk us through those just as a reminder and takeaway, and then we'll close it out here.
Sure. So the six power process principles are: principle number one, review and examine everything that gets repeated more than once. Number two, start with the end in mind. Number three, stand on the shoulders of giants, or at least those who've gone first or those who've gone before. Number four is focus on the critical few. Number five is move levels with awareness and fluency, so technician, manager, and entrepreneur. And number six is monitor, communicate, and correct.
Wow. Great stuff, man. I love this framework. So I hope our listeners have gotten a lot out of this one. We're going to continue to do these deep dives into e-commerce leadership principles. And we're liking the feedback we're getting as well. We've gotten private messages. We've gotten, people who are talking to us, our coaching clients have said they've been listening. One review that we just got not too long ago said, I love when people speak my language. No sustainable business will ever be built on tactics or hacks. And Michael and Jason know that and share with actionable strategies that will actually help you move forward forever, not temporarily until the next trend comes along. And so I love that little review of the show. And if you're listening and enjoying the show, go leave a review. Now, one of the things I learned was that the reviews from the UK listeners show up in the Apple iTunes UK version. I can't see those. And then the reviews from the US people show up on the US side. You can't see those. So it's fun for us to be able to share these. But if you're listening to this, we really love a review, and of course, subscribe so that you get notified. Sorry, when the next episode pops up. We're trying to do several a week, and we're going to keep putting them out here because we've got a lot of great business owners in our system and our network, and we are honored, really honored to serve them. And so this is one of the ways we can do that. And so with that, let me just say thanks again for all your insight and tips, Michael. This has been a great conversation.